I stopped cold in the middle of the aisle, my ticket still pinched between my fingers. A man in a dark suit stood beside seat 14C, leaned close enough for his shoulder to brush mine, and whispered four words no one else could hear. Get off this train. Not a plane, a train. I should make that clear from the start. Where I come from, flying was never much of a habit. Whenever I visited family, I took the Coast Starlight from Seattle, and that was exactly where I was headed that morning. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 67 years old, a retired structural engineer. For 38 years, I approved the parts of buildings nobody ever notices, the hidden framework that either keeps everything standing or sends it crashing down. That kind of work teaches you something. Things rarely collapse without warning. The damage begins quietly, hidden beneath the surface, until one day the weight becomes too much. I didn't realize my own family was following that same pattern until a complete stranger saw the cracks before I did. At the time, my son Craig and his wife Denise had been living in my house for nearly a year. Craig said he'd lost his job at a logistics company because of restructuring. I never pressed him for details. That's not how I was raised, and it's not how I raised him. Denise had been out of work even longer. She claimed she'd worked in insurance, but whenever the conversation drifted that way, she'd steer it somewhere else. They arrived in June with 2 suitcases and a packed U-Haul, filling my basement with furniture that never quite belonged. Before long, the house settled into an awkward routine. Brief greetings in the hallway, silent breakfasts, polite conversations that ended before they started. One afternoon, I was in my workshop sorting through old blueprints from my career. My late wife used to laugh and call them sentimental junk, and she wasn't entirely wrong. Then I heard the back door open. 2 sets of footsteps came down the stairs with a purpose that instantly put me on edge. Denise walked in first. Craig followed behind, both hands buried in his pockets, refusing to meet my eyes. Walter, Denise said with a smile that never reached her face. We need to talk. I carefully laid the blueprint on the table, just as I used to when a young engineer handed me calculations that didn't feel right. About what? I asked. Craig cleared his throat. We were thinking, maybe we should do something together as a family before life gets busy again. He still wouldn't look at me. Remember our trip to Glacier National Park when I was 12? I remember you getting altitude sickness, I replied. You threw up twice on the trail and made us head back early. I was a kid, he said quickly. I'd be fine now. Denise stepped in without missing a beat. We want to take the Coast Starlight all the way to San Diego. Sleeper car, full trip. Our treat. Everything's already paid for. I looked at Craig and saw the same expression I'd watched countless junior engineers wear when they tried to bury a bad number inside a perfect-looking report. Desperation dressed up as confidence. When? I asked. Next week, Denise answered. It's all arranged. We just need you to say yes. That evening, Denise cooked dinner. That alone felt wrong. She never cooked. She moved around my kitchen like she'd owned it for years, and watching her touch my cabinets, my dishes, even my wife's old cookware made the house feel unfamiliar, as if someone had quietly started replacing pieces of my life while I wasn't paying attention. Craig poured the wine, but the bottle trembled slightly in his hand. So, all of this was planned before anyone bothered asking me, I said, accepting the glass. We wanted it to be a surprise, Craig replied. A good surprise. Dinner continued until Denise calmly set down her fork. Walter, your union life insurance policy. It's still worth about $580,000, isn't it? That's a lot of money. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. How do you know that number? Craig mentioned it once, she answered with an easy smile while slicing her chicken into perfect little pieces. Just casual conversation. I looked at my son. He suddenly seemed fascinated by his dinner. Back when I was an engineer, we tested steel beams by adding pressure, not to break them, but to expose weaknesses that were already there. So I decided to do the same. I've been having trouble sleeping lately, I said. Some nights my chest feels tight, probably nothing. For one unguarded second, Craig's eyes brightened. It wasn't concern, it was hope. Then he caught himself. You should have that checked, Dad. Denise smiled across the table. Craig worries too much. You look healthier than anyone your age. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. After dinner, they went downstairs, leaving a stack of papers on the kitchen counter. The train reservation was sitting right on top, paid in full. My sleeper ticket had already been booked before I'd ever agreed to go. They hadn't expected an answer. They'd expected compliance. That night, I pulled out an old photograph of Craig at 6 years old, grinning beside a fishing rod almost taller than he was. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it back into the drawer. Every failed structure leaves behind evidence. The only question is whether someone bothers to look for it. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I'd take the trip, but this time I'd be watching everything. When Craig knocked on my bedroom door the next morning wearing a smile that felt a little too rehearsed, he asked, "So, San Diego?" "Sounds good," I answered. Relief flashed across his face, followed by something colder. Anticipation. I packed the way I'd prepared for every inspection during my career, leaving nothing to chance. My medication stayed in my carry-on instead of the luggage. A small decision that felt excessive unless it wasn't. The drive to the station revealed even more. Craig insisted the trunk was completely full, so my duffel had to stay on my lap. The problem was, I'd looked inside that trunk an hour earlier. It had been nearly empty. Denise spent the ride texting nonstop, deleting every conversation seconds after sending it. She wore the same blank expression I'd started recognizing whenever she was calculating something. At the station, the two of them boarded first. Their names were on a sleeper compartment together. An attendant led me to a coach seat, 3 cars behind them, traveling alone. As I gripped my duffel and watched them disappear without a single glance over their shoulders, I realized there are moments when betrayal stops being a feeling and becomes a fact. I settled into my seat, and a few minutes later, the man in the dark suit walked slowly down the aisle. One look told me he wasn't a conductor. The man wasn't wearing a conductor's uniform. The only thing that identified him was a badge hanging from a lanyard with 2 small words, Amtrak Police. He stopped beside my row, pretending to scroll through his tablet. Without looking at me, he spoke so quietly no one nearby could hear. "Get off this train at the next stop. Don't make it obvious." Then he walked away as if nothing had happened, checking tickets along the aisle. I sat frozen, my pulse pounding harder than it had in decades. Had he mistaken me for someone else? Was there another Walter Greer on board? I pulled out my phone just to keep my hands busy. A moment later he returned, and the calm expression he'd worn before was gone. He grabbed my forearm. His hand was shaking. "Sir," he whispered, "I'm asking you, please get off this train at the next station." I searched his face. What I saw wasn't uncertainty or confusion. It was fear, the kind that belongs to someone who knows something terrible but can't explain it yet. "You're sure?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything." Just then, Craig called from several rows ahead. "Dad, everything okay back there?" I made my decision the same way I'd made countless calls on construction sites when steel started groaning fast. Before hesitation became disaster, I stood up, grabbed the seat in front of me, and raised my voice. "I don't feel right," my chest. Then I let my knees give way into the aisle. The panic in my voice was genuine. Only the cause was a lie. The car erupted instantly. A nurse rushed over from 2 rows back. Someone shouted for the conductor. Another passenger radioed ahead for paramedics to meet the train at the next station. Through the chaos, I kept my eyes barely open, watching Craig and Denise before they had time to prepare their expressions. What I saw chilled me far more than anything the officer had said. They weren't frightened. They were disappointed. It was the look of people watching a carefully planned outcome slip away. Craig started toward me, almost angrily, then caught himself. "Dad, should we come back there?" A conductor stepped between us. "Sir, stay where you are. We've got him." Minutes later, they rolled me onto the station platform. As I passed the sleeper cars, I heard Denise whisper to Craig, thinking no one else could hear. "This ruins everything," Craig answered through clenched teeth. "Not here." If you've ever caught a split second of the wrong emotion on the face of someone you love, relief, where there should have been fear, annoyance, where there should have been concern, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That first reaction is the honest one. Everything after that is the mask. The station medic checked me over in the first aid room. My heart was fine. My blood pressure was normal. He decided it was probably anxiety. Through the window, I watched the coast starlight pull away, carrying my son and daughter-in-law toward a trip that suddenly no longer included me. My phone buzzed. Craig, Dad, hope you're feeling better. Call us when you can. A second message followed, then a third. I switched the phone off. A few seconds later, the door opened, and the transit officer stepped inside. The transit officer had taken off his jacket by the time he walked in. His face was pale. Before saying a word, he checked both ends of the hallway and quietly shut the door. "What I'm about to show you could cost me my job," he said. "But I can't ignore it." He unlocked his phone and held the screen toward me. "I recorded this in the station restroom before we boarded. Your daughter-in-law was inside." The video showed nothing but a bathroom stall, white tile, and harsh fluorescent lights. The picture meant nothing. The audio meant everything. Denise's voice came through crystal clear, calm, and businesslike. The capsules dissolved completely. No taste, no smell. Cardiac arrest on a moving train is ruled natural almost every time. By the time anyone asks questions, we'll be 3 states away. Silence followed for a moment before another voice spoke through the phone. 580? Denise answered without hesitation. Craig's nervous, but he's committed. Then she laughed. Not nervously, not awkwardly. She laughed the way someone laughs after telling a harmless joke over dinner. I played the recording again, then again. Every time I heard something worse, the dosage, the timing, the money they'd already attached to my death. Who was she talking to? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The officer shook his head. I don't know, but she said the plan was moving forward, and that your son was completely on board. I looked at the man who had just risked everything for a stranger. Why would you do this for me? For the first time, his expression changed. My father died 4 years ago, he said quietly. My stepmother convinced him to change his will 2 months before he passed in his sleep. The coroner called it natural causes. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it, so I stayed quiet. He lowered his eyes for a second. I'm not making that mistake twice. I wrote down his name and phone number in the small notebook I'd carried since 1987. Years on construction sites had taught me one simple rule. If it isn't documented, it never happened. When we shook hands, neither of us was shaking anymore. Stop them, he said. Then he walked out. The bus ride home lasted nearly the entire day. Somewhere along the highway, the shock wore off and habit took over. Grief solves nothing. Work does. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly as I'd left it, the same porch, the same flower beds, the same windows. But the moment I stepped inside, it no longer felt like home. Every room suddenly seemed to hide a second story I'd never noticed. I went straight to my study, gathered every important document I owned, and spread them across the dining room table. Insurance policies, bank records, property deeds, my will. I approached them the same way I'd investigated structural failures for nearly 4 decades, building a chain of evidence one piece at a time. It didn't take long. Buried in my insurance paperwork was a beneficiary change form dated 8 months earlier. The payout had been moved from my niece Caroline, a hospice nurse in Boise who had never asked me for a penny, to Craig Greer. The signature looked convincing until I reached the capital G. Too many loops. Too much flourish. I'd never signed my name that way once in 67 years. I photographed the document and kept digging. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Over the previous 5 months, nearly $38,000 had quietly disappeared from my accounts through a series of small transfers, each one just insignificant enough to escape notice on its own. Then I found the document that made my stomach turn. A power of attorney giving Craig full control over my finances, signed with the same forged signature. It wasn't the end of it. The last folder held medical records from a doctor I'd never seen in my life. According to those files, I was suffering from memory loss, confusion, and progressive cognitive decline. Every diagnosis was fake. Every report looked authentic. Denise had spent years working insurance claims. She knew exactly how to make lies pass as official paperwork. They hadn't only planned my death. They'd spent months erasing the man I really was, replacing me with a version on paper whose mind was already gone. Once that story existed, my death would seem natural, and anything I said beforehand would sound like the ramblings of a confused old man. Standing alone in my dining room, I finally said the truth out loud. They'd built this plan while living under my roof and eating at my table. The grief disappeared, replaced by something far more useful: clarity. 3 days later, I met with Miriam Castellano, an attorney who had spent 22 years protecting elderly clients from fraud and exploitation. Her calm expression lasted exactly as long as it took to open the first folder. She flipped through the forged beneficiary form, the fake power of attorney, and the fabricated medical records without saying a word. When she reached the insurance documents, she looked up. "Your daughter-in-law works in insurance claims?" 15 years, I answered. "She knows which forms make a lie look legitimate." Miriam leaned back and slowly exhaled. "She didn't just forge documents. She engineered your incompetence." After a long silence, she folded her hands. "I need you to answer one question honestly. When this is over, do you want justice or revenge?" I'd already answered that question in my own mind. "I want them to fully understand what they tried to do," I said. "And I want the consequences to last longer than any apology they could ever offer." She gave a small nod. "Then we build a case they can't escape, and let them destroy themselves." Over the next week, she quietly prepared everything: protective orders, frozen accounts, legal safeguards, all timed so Craig and Denise wouldn't know until it was too late. "Act exactly as you always have," she told me. "The moment those restrictions take effect, they'll panic." I smiled. Panicked people make mistakes. I'd watched that happen on construction sites my entire career. That evening, Craig sent me a text. "Dad, let's have dinner soon. We should talk about your future." I replied with 6 simple words. Yes, we should discuss the future. He took it as surrender. I meant it as a promise. Then came the hardest role I'd ever played. For 2 weeks, I became the confused old man they had invented on paper. I stared at cold cups of coffee as though I'd forgotten they were mine. I asked Denise which medications I was supposed to take while a hidden camera above the refrigerator recorded every smile that crossed her face as she handed me the pills. "Of course, Walter," she said sweetly. "That's what family is for." At my own request, a security company installed 12 cameras with full audio coverage throughout the house. Craig and Denise praised the idea without hesitation. "Smart move, Dad. It'll keep you safe." Neither of them asked how the system worked. Neither realized every conversation inside my home was automatically backed up to a secure cloud account that only I could access. I added one more safeguard myself: a small recorder hidden inside the heating vent above the dining room. It was an old trick I'd learned decades earlier while catching subcontractors stealing from a construction project. Different crime, same principle. Less than 2 days later, it paid off. Late that night, wearing headphones, I listened as Denise's voice cut through the recording, sharp with frustration. "The train was supposed to finish this." "Now we're back to square one," Craig answered nervously. "You said the capsules couldn't be traced." Denise's reply came in the same calm, clinical tone that frightened me more than shouting ever could. "Then we move to Plan B," Denise said. "We declare him incompetent. Just look at him. He's already halfway there." I lay awake one floor above them, listening through my headphones. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades. Focus doesn't. They thought they were watching me fall apart. In reality, I was lining up the shot. The most dangerous part came after midnight. While Craig slept, I copied everything from his laptop onto an external drive. Folder after folder, file after file, the evidence slowly piled up. When the transfer was almost finished, I heard footsteps outside the bedroom. I yanked out the drive, slipped through the connecting bathroom, and hid it inside my bathrobe pocket. My heart pounded harder than it had on that train, but the files were safe. The next morning, I started building my own defense. I signed a brand new will before a notary named Rosa Alvarez. She read every clause aloud, recorded the entire signing, verified my fingerprints, and made sure no one could challenge my mental capacity later. When she reached the inheritance section, she looked at me. "Your son receives nothing?" It wasn't disbelief, just confirmation. "My son already put a price on my life," I replied. "That's all he'll ever collect." Every dollar I owned would instead fund the Greer Family Trade Scholarship, helping young people attend vocational schools, the same kind of opportunity that had given me my own start in life. Later that afternoon, Miriam met me in a parking garage and handed me a prepaid phone. One button, she said. If this turns physical, the police already know the situation. I slipped it into my pocket and hoped I'd never have to use it. The financial freeze took effect on Wednesday morning. I sat behind my newspaper and quietly counted the seconds until I heard Craig's laptop erupt with notification after notification upstairs. Access denied, account locked, identity verification required. From the hallway, I filmed everything. His confidence disappeared within minutes as one call to the bank turned into desperate pleading. When he finally hung up, the color had drained from his face. They froze every account I can access, he told Denise. There's a fraud investigation. That evening I cooked pot roast, just like I used to after my wife passed away. Then I served dinner to the two people who had planned my funeral before my death. Halfway through the meal, I casually said, "Funny thing, the bank called today about some unusual transfers from my accounts. I asked them to investigate." Craig nearly choked on his water. Denise's fork froze for the briefest instant before she recovered. "Walter," she said gently, "this is exactly why someone needs to help manage your finances. You're getting confused." "Confused?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Interesting choice." I looked directly at her. "You mean medical supervision? For my own protection?" I paused. "Protection from who?" Silence answered better than either of them could. Their faces said everything. That night, the living room cameras captured their next conversation in perfect audio. Denise paced across the room. "We need medical power of attorney. I know people who can make it happen. Once he's declared incompetent, we'll be his legal guardians. And guardians decide whether this investigation keeps going." Craig didn't argue. He simply nodded, already calculating the next move. I opened the notebook I'd carried for decades and wrote a single sentence. "The most revealing test is the one people create for themselves." Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. I had nothing left to fear. 2 mornings later, my phone rang. A pleasant voice introduced himself as my family physician and invited me in for a routine cognitive evaluation. That was interesting, because I'd never had a family doctor by that name. I thanked him politely, accepted the appointment, then called Miriam. Less than 2 minutes later, she called back. "There isn't a physician with that name licensed anywhere in Washington." I kept the appointment anyway. A recorder rested inside my shirt pocket, and plainclothes officers waited just a few blocks away. The moment I arrived, everything felt wrong. The office had been rented by the day. A paper sign had been taped to the door that morning. The man introducing himself as a doctor wore a fake credential and asked questions designed so that every answer could be twisted into evidence of mental decline. I played along, acting just confused enough to keep him talking while every word was captured on my recorder. The next morning, I visited a real expert, Dr. Elaine Whitfield, a forensic psychiatrist with nearly 3 decades of experience, spent over 2 hours putting me through memory tests, reasoning exercises, and cognitive evaluations. She watched not only my answers, but the way I solved each problem. When the examination ended, she closed the file and smiled. "Mr. Greer, your cognitive abilities are stronger than those of many people 20 years younger. There are no signs of dementia, delusion, or impaired judgment." I drove home with her report on the passenger seat. Craig's car was parked across my driveway. He stood on the porch holding a manila envelope, wearing the expression of a man betting everything on one final bluff. "Dad," he said quietly, "this is for your own good. You're not well." I opened the envelope and read every page right there in the driveway. It was a petition asking the court to appoint Craig as my legal guardian. According to the documents, I suffered from paranoia, memory loss, and progressive cognitive decline. The medical affidavit was signed by a Dr. Monica Reyes, a physician who, as far as I could determine, didn't exist. I looked up from the papers. "Tell me something, Craig. Whose safety is this really protecting? Mine or yours?" He never answered. He simply walked away. That evening I visited my neighbors one by one, carrying the same notebook I'd trusted throughout my career. The story unraveled faster than I expected. Mrs. Okafor burst into tears the moment I explained what had happened. "Craig told me it was just paperwork so he could help take care of you," she said. "The only thing I've ever seen you do is work in your garden and check those new security cameras. She immediately agreed to withdraw her statement. 2 more neighbors did the same. Others refused to answer their doors. I later discovered Craig had quietly paid them $400 here, $200 there to support his version of events. At the preliminary hearing, the judge read both sides with obvious skepticism and ordered an independent evaluation from Dr. Whitfield. Afterward, Miriam wanted to file every criminal charge immediately. "We have enough," she said. "Let's finish this." I shook my head. "Not yet. The moment they hire lawyers, they'll stop talking. Right now, they still believe they're in control." She warned me I was taking a risk. She was right. But I'd spent 38 years watching dishonest contractors react the same way. Every time they were cornered, they always made one mistake too many. Dr. Whitfield's official report arrived a few days later. It couldn't have been clearer. Full mental capacity. No impairment. Guardianship petition should be denied. That afternoon, Miriam and I assembled the case we'd been building piece by piece. 60 pages of filings, 17 separate criminal allegations, and 2 boxes of carefully organized evidence. "We file all of it," Miriam said. I nodded. "Everything." Later that day, a process server knocked on my front door while I watched from across the street through a zoom lens. Denise answered. The moment she saw the envelope, every real emotion crossed her face in rapid succession: shock, recognition, then fear. She screamed for Craig. Through the curtains, I watched them argue inside my own living room. The process server later included one sentence in his sworn report that I never forgot. Denise had shouted, "You told me he was too old to figure this out." That night, my cameras captured pure panic. Craig frantically deleted files and tried wiping his hard drive, unaware that I already had copies of everything. Denise stuffed document after document into a shredder until it jammed, then tore the remaining papers apart with her own hands. Miriam called while watching the live camera feed from her office. "Every file they're deleting is another criminal charge," she said. "Obstruction of justice. They're collecting evidence against themselves now." 2 days later, their attorney sent a settlement proposal. They offered to return the stolen $38,000, move out of my house immediately, give up any inheritance claims, and accept a restraining order if I agreed to drop every criminal charge. I read the offer at the same dining room table where this nightmare had begun. Then I looked at Miriam. They researched how to stop my heart. They calculated the payout. They bought the train tickets. This isn't a financial dispute. I slid the papers back across the table. Schedule the trial. A few weeks later, another offer arrived, this time for $120,000, delivered by Denise's embarrassed sister. The very first sentence described everything as an unfortunate mistake. I uncapped my pen and wrote across the front page in the same handwriting I'd used to approve thousands of engineering plans. "Justice is not for sale. I'll see you in court." That evening, I called the transit officer and asked if he was prepared to testify. He answered without hesitation. "My father never got his chance. Yours is going to count for both of them." After that, their lives unraveled piece by piece. During discovery, Craig's hidden gambling debts surfaced more than $70,000, spread across sports betting accounts and cryptocurrency platforms no one knew existed. Once the creditors learned he would inherit nothing, the phone calls turned into personal visits at his temporary job. Denise's employer launched its own investigation after receiving copies of the forged paperwork. Within days, they uncovered years of falsified insurance records tied directly to her. Her career ended in less than 15 minutes, escorted out of the building by security while her coworkers watched. They rented a small apartment with walls thin enough for every argument to spill into the hallway. Night after night, the neighbors heard the same accusations. "This is your fault. Your debts started all of this. Your weakness ruined everything." Then one evening, Craig said the sentence that exposed the truth of their entire marriage. "Now, we've got nothing except each other." Denise answered with a laugh so empty it barely sounded human. The night before trial, I stood alone in my study, staring at the wall where I'd pinned every document, every timeline, every piece of evidence. Then I removed the only thing that had never belonged there as evidence, a photograph of 6-year-old Craig holding a fishing rod almost taller than he was, smiling as if the whole world had been made just for him. I let myself grieve for the little boy in that picture one last time. Then I turned it over and wrote 3 short sentences before sealing it inside an envelope addressed to my son. I gave you everything I had. You chose another path. Now we both have to live with what remains. The trial lasted 4 days. By the first morning, the courtroom was packed. News of an attempted murder aboard a passenger train had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to hear the evidence. The prosecutor wasted no time. The defendants planned Walter Greer's death for insurance money. They researched the poison, forged legal documents, manipulated financial records, and boarded that train expecting to collect $500,000. The only reason Mr. Greer is sitting in this courtroom today instead of lying in a morgue is because one transit officer chose to act. Then the recording filled the courtroom. Every juror listened as Denise calmly discussed my death, named the insurance amount, and laughed. Craig visibly flinched the moment she laughed. Denise never looked up. She stared at the wall without moving until the recording ended. The transit officer took the witness stand next. His voice trembled through the first few questions before becoming steady. I heard her plan a man's death the same way someone schedules a delivery, he told the jury. I stayed silent once before, and I buried my own father wondering if I could have prevented it. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. Finally, the forensic document examiner projected my signature onto a screen and walked the jury through every difference under 400 times magnification, beginning with the forged capital G that had started unraveling the entire scheme. The bank's investigators explained to the jury how more than $38,000 had been siphoned from my accounts through dozens of carefully spaced transactions designed to avoid attention. Dr. Whitfield took the stand next and dismantled the fabricated incompetency diagnosis in less than 15 minutes. Then came the recovered emails. One after another, they appeared on the courtroom screen, discussions about dosage, timing, travel schedules, and the value of my insurance policy. Throughout it all, Craig never looked up. He stared at his own hands as though they belonged to someone else. Then it was my turn. The prosecutor asked the first question. When did you realize something wasn't right? The moment they invited me on that trip, I answered. For months, we barely spoke inside the same house. Then suddenly I was offered an all-expenses-paid vacation with a fixed date. In engineering, we call that an abnormal reading. And abnormal readings always deserve investigation. What did you do after that? The only thing I knew how to do. I documented everything. I trusted evidence instead of assumptions. I verified every fact before drawing a conclusion. I paused for a moment. I just never imagined the structure I'd be inspecting would be my own family. The defense tried to shake my testimony, but their cross-examination lasted only a few minutes and accomplished the opposite. Every answer strengthened the prosecution's case. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Then the verdicts began. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of fraud, guilty of forgery, guilty of identity theft, guilty, one count after another. Each word seemed to weigh heavier than the last. Craig lowered his head into his hands. Denise maintained her composure until a single tear escaped before she quietly brushed it away. During sentencing, the judge asked whether I wished to speak. I stood, looked at both of them, and kept my statement brief. You lived under my roof. You ate at my table. You answered decades of trust with calculations, forged documents, and a price on my life. I took a slow breath. I don't hate either of you. I mourn the people you chose to become. You traded your future for money you were never going to receive. That's a sentence no court could invent. Craig was sentenced to 11 years in prison, required to repay every stolen dollar, and left with a permanent felony record. Denise received 14 years. The court found she had designed the scheme, manipulated medical and insurance systems, and orchestrated nearly every step of the plan. Her professional license was permanently revoked. Every inheritance right was terminated, and a lifetime protective order prohibited her from ever contacting me again. Before ending the hearing, the judge delivered a sentence I never forgot. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate project carried out over many months by two people who mistook a father's trust for vulnerability. The only mercy in this case is that Mr. Greer survived long enough to expose it. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps, but I offered only a few words. Trust is precious. Consequences are real. Then I walked away. Later, in the courthouse parking garage, I saw Craig one final time as deputies escorted him toward a transport vehicle. His hands were cuffed. His head stayed lowered until our eyes met for just a second. He looked away first. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt something quieter, like a ledger that had finally balanced after years of carrying the wrong numbers. If there's one lesson this experience left me with, it's this. Loving someone isn't the same as truly seeing them. We often mistake the two. Denise understood that from the very beginning. She knew a father would keep explaining away warning signs because accepting the truth about his own child would hurt more than believing another comforting lie. Denial is one of the greatest allies deception has. It asks nothing from the people doing wrong while costing everything to the person who refuses to see it. I didn't survive because I was lucky. I survived because one stranger chose to speak when staying silent would have been easier. And I survived because I spent 38 years trusting evidence over assumptions. That's a habit anyone can start today. This week, take 10 minutes and pull out your life insurance paperwork. Call your insurance company and ask them to read your current beneficiaries back to you, one by one. Then request that no future change can be made without speaking directly to you first. Most people haven't reviewed those documents in years, and the people who stand to gain from that silence are counting on exactly that. Then ask yourself one difficult question. Among the people closest to you, who knows more about what your life is worth on paper than about how your last week has actually been? Don't answer too quickly. I couldn't. For 2 years, I've replayed every decision I made, and even now, I'm not sure there was a perfect path. So I'd like to hear what you think. If you believe I was right to quietly gather evidence and let them expose themselves, leave a 1 in the comments. If you think I should have taken the recording straight to the police the moment I got off that train, leave a 2. If you believe I should have sat down with my son one final time before involving the law, leave a 3. I'm genuinely curious how you see it. While you're there, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. It still amazes me how far these stories travel and how many people they reach. And if a stranger has ever protected you when someone close to you wouldn't, or if you've ever noticed that brief expression on someone's face that revealed more truth than all their words combined, I hope you'll share your story below. Someone reading these comments tonight may need to know they aren't imagining what they're seeing. If this story stayed with you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and joined me again. There are many more stories to tell, and this community only exists because people like you choose to come back. Thank you for spending part of your evening with me. Until next time, take care of yourself.